and children. We've had a great support from the community here in Riall County, and we are so happy to be able to share some of the things that we do here with all of you. In the future, we plan to present more special programs. Our new exhibit in the center of our event today is what we will be unveiling this morning. The first on our program is a presentation on the rich Indigenous heritage of Riall County. We are very privileged and honored to have David Barkalow as our presenter. David is a history professor and teaches a variety of historical subjects. His wife is Fanita Rubio Barkalow. Our family, the Rubios, have very deep roots in this community. David has taught various history courses for 6 years at Wayland Baptist University in San Antonio, Texas. He is a Wayland Baptist University graduate and has completed additional coursework on various historical topics through the Smithsonian Institution, including the National Museum of the American Indian and Harvard University. David has a variety of published journal articles that can be found on the Texas State Historical Association site. He has lectured for numerous groups. David has also published 2 books on women's history that target school students and adults, and he has copies available today. So yes, he loves history. And I'm so thankful for the day that he and Fanita stopped by the museum. So, everybody, welcome David Barkalow.
Well, thank you, Linda. That was really nice. Great introduction. Yeah, my name is David Barkalow, if you haven't figured that out already. And it's a pleasure with me to be here today. And you know, it is wonderful to see what these wonderful ladies and the board members have done to this museum. It's really a nice, beautiful museum. Hopefully you all have a chance to take a look at everything. It's it has so many wonderful exhibits, so you all should take advantage of that. It's a gem of the community. So today, we are going to walk through the timeline of Riall County. Now, we always think of Riall County, when you think about Riall County, you think about Lakey, you kind of think about one person, and that is John Lakey, the city's named after. Now, when John and Nancy Lakey showed up here in the mid-1850s, this was just 10 years after the state of Texas was formed. So it was very rugged, very remote. We just love that concept of the rugged individual that comes to tame the Wild West. I mean, Americans have just enjoyed this for generations. And they epitomized that. They owned a sawmill down on the in Lakey Springs, and they produced lumber and shingles for the area to use. But what we don't think about when we think about John and Lakey Nancy is when they arrived here, this area had already been inhabited, but we don't think about that. So who were these people? Where did they come from? And how long did they call Riall County home?
Okay.
So when we think about Riall County and Lakey itself, and the city's named after him, we look at a historical marker. There's a giant historical marker just a block away from here. And it talks about him arriving, but it really just barely mentions like anyone that had been here before. In fact, it mentions he lived under constant threat of Indian attacks. So, but who were these people? Where did they come from? And it just says they were Indians. That's all we know from this plaque. So I'm just going to ask the group here, so when you watch National Geographic or any of these shows or read books, they always talk about the founding, or when the first man appeared on Earth. And so, tell me, like, where was the first human beings or first fossil records of human beings found on the planet? You know? Africa. Yeah, it's generally Africa. In most instances, it's Africa. So if that's where human beings started, how did human beings get here to the Western Hemisphere, North America? So when the first Europeans arrived, they were here. So we're going to delve into that. So we're going to have a little history class today to talk about that, and then talk about how they got to Riall County. And who were these people? So the prevailing theory on how people got here originally is the Beringia theory. Now there's a multitude of theories out there today, but this is the prevailing one. And to look at this, we have to go way, way back in history. And we're talking about 12,000 to 45,000 years ago. Now the prevailing theory is that we went through an ice age. It's called the Wisconsin glaciation. And this is the last ice age that the Earth went through. Now, what occurred at this time period is it was a lot colder than today, possibly 10 degrees colder. It was a much different climate, and what happened was it starts getting colder and you get more snow. So in the upper regions of North America and Asia, it snowed, and that snow did not melt. It created ice, and it started building up and building up and building up over land, and over time, that's just water. So the water's got to come from somewhere, so we start to see the ocean levels drop. Now it's believed that the ocean levels dropped up to 300 to 400 feet. So of course the coastlines start moving farther and farther out. So what happens is, around this time, in the Wisconsin glaciation, is we start to see more land. And the theory of Beringia is that up in the area of Alaska, Asia, we start to have more seafloor showing, and it was actually dry land. And so during this time period, it's believed that originally animals started walking across because this was new land to explore. And then mankind started following the animals because they were hunter-gatherers this time. This was their food supply. So they started coming over. It wasn't like it disappeared overnight and everybody came running over. This was over thousands and thousands of years. So they started walking across the dry seafloor. They were following animals which we call megafauna. So these are giant animals, mammoths, mastodons, things like that. So as this land link appeared and people started coming across, they started moving farther southward. So who were these people? And how do we know that they were actually here? So the earliest people arrived tens of thousands of years ago. And as they moved into the Western Hemisphere, following these animals, they moved farther and farther south. And eventually, they started repopulating. So the population started growing in North and South America. So what evidence do we really have of this? Well, there are actually many sites in Texas and even in this area that can explain this for us. There's one really great site. It's north of Austin. It's called the Galt site. And the Galt site is really rewriting a lot of history books today because it keeps pushing back how far we believe that human beings were living in this area. And the Galt site, they believe that they pushed human habitation in the region back at least 20,000 years. So way, way back. Another area is called the Kincaid Shelter, and that's nearer to Lakey. This is in Sabinal, and this is right on the Sabinal River. And there is an outcropping there, and it includes a cave. And they've excavated this area and believe that mankind lived there about 13,000 years ago. And what they found there was remains of humans, but they also found lots of animals. They found mastodons, mammoths, they found bison, horses, and they even found alligator there. Now, if you can imagine alligator living in the rivers around here, that would change everything about tubing in rivers because you're going like this and looking over your shoulder all the time. But they found all those things, so it was a totally different climate. Another thing we found, which was going to be unveiled at the end of this talk, is the Lewis Ranch Rock. This was found about 10 miles northwest of Lakey. This is a petroglyph, and we'll talk about those in just a minute. And it's believed to be at least 900 to 2,000 years old, could be even older. But even with these incredible discoveries, the new sites and artifacts are being found all the time. We have lots of wonderful examples in the cases over here. We have people that are looking for these things and excavating these on a daily basis. And We have David in the room? Did he step up? We had an archaeologist here. It's David
I think he's going,
Oh.
David Callum, I think he's
Callum.
going through all of the points outside.
Where he's digging on the side of the building.
Yeah.
So he's an archaeologist, and he's doing a lot of work. They found so many interesting artifacts in South Texas, and we continue to find them all the time. And it's just wonderful to see these things. But let's go back and start talking about the people again. We believe that the earliest peoples that lived in this immediate area was during the Paleo-Indian period, and let's talk about that period of time. So the Paleo-Indian period is 1150 to 6500 BCE. BCE is the newer term for BC. This is about 13,500 years ago to maybe 8,500 years ago, a long time ago. So during this period, mankind did live in this area. We do know that for sure. This is called Paleo-Indian, and the word paleo means ancient or old, so this is ancient Indians. This is a time when the climate was much cooler than today. About 10 degrees cooler. It was wetter, maybe not wetter than this morning, but it was wetter, so greener, much different climate here. We also still had Ice Age animals living here at this time. We had giant sloths, we had mammoths, we had mastodons, and many other animals living here at this time, which is hard for us to comprehend, in this day of age. So, how do we know that happened? So we have found remains. We have found remains of animals and people at this time. We also found tools. And there's some examples over here in this case. You can look at it after the talk today. There's one really good example of a Galandrino point, which is an arrow, what we call an arrowhead, and it's been dated back at least 9,000 years ago. And that was found just 10 miles away from here. So, really, really interesting discoveries. So these people that lived this time, they were hunter-gatherers. They were always on the move. These people were walkers, like extreme walkers. They would walk hundreds and hundreds of miles throughout the year because they were following animals. And they were always looking for the new thing to eat because that's how we survived. They could, as they walked these hundreds of miles, these people were also experts at creating deadly weapons. These are the points and axes and different tools they used to hunt animals, cut animals apart, and cook animals. So that was their life. They used spears, so they put the points on the end of long sticks. They used those for spears, and they also used something called the atlatl. And we're going to have an example of an atlatl throwing this afternoon, but I also have a modern built atlatl to show you. Aha! This is where I have to pick my turn. So this is what these ancient peoples used. It's called an atlatl. It was a two-piece device. This is the throwing device. And what it is if you had to throw a spear, you have the length of your arm to project your motion and to project all that force. They figured out, very smart people, when you have a lot of time on your hand and you have to kill animals to eat, you get really smart. So they decided to use an atlatl. They have a throwing device, generally about 2 feet in length with a hook on the end, and they would have a 5 to 6 foot spear with a point on the end, and it would generally be a arrow point, which you would see in the cabinet over here. At the end of the spear, you'd have a hole, and this thing would hook onto the hole. If I can do it, there we go. And what they would do is you'd have a motion, they would run and throw it like this, and as it left, my arm would push that off. Believe it or not, you could throw this thing about 2 to 3 times the length as you could throw a spear, and with a lot more force. So we'll have an example of this. Jackson is going to show, he's going to throw one this afternoon, and make sure you see that because it's very impressive. But these people had a lot of ingenuity to figure these things out. Some atlatls came in pieces where there were sections. So they throw them, and the first section would almost be like a rocket today where they drops off pieces. this would drop off one piece and this would keep going. And so they could retrieve this and make sure they get it back, because it's a lot of work to create something like this. So this is an atlatl. So the people at this time, they were very smart, a lot smarter than we give them credit for. The people were hunter-gatherers. They had to hunt mammoths, bison, and other animals with tools like this. So you had to get fairly close to an animal like that to take it down. And during the cooler climate, our creeks were running at a higher rate than they were today. Things were greener, grasses were taller. So you had places to hide, which were good, to hunt animals, but they also generally followed streams and tributaries, because that's where the animals generally were. We know that the Paleo Indians lived in groups of about 20 to 40 people, included their family and extended family. They also moved place to place. Now they lived in caves, rock shelters, but they also built their own temporary shelters, which they would stick branches together and form like a pyramid shape, almost like an early teepee, what we know as a teepee today. But these would be easy to form structures. They would wrap them maybe in hides, mud, or other branches to create their own shelter. The floor of their dwellings were generally grass, where they would throw leaves down, because no one wants to sleep on the hard ground, just like today. But what was going on at this time period, the Paleo-Indian period, things were changing. We were moving away from the Ice Age, and as time progressed, it was getting warmer outside. And as it was getting warmer, it was getting drier. And so what was going on, that by the end of the Paleo-Indian period, it got to a point where these megafauna, these large animals like mastodons and mammoths, could not survive in this new environment, and they started dying out. And as they started dying out, the Paleo-Indian people started adapting their lives to start hunting other animals. They started choosing deer and smaller animals to hunt. Whereas the large megafauna couldn't adapt, they could. We also see at this time, and a lot of people ask me all the time, like, why when you look at arrow points that you see projectile points, there's so many different sizes and shapes and all this, is because over time, these people adapted. They were smart. They made tools to hunt specific animals, and different animals were changing, so they were constantly changing their style to build something that was efficient. Now, the information on this period is tough, because people didn't have a written language, they didn't leave books behind to tell us about it. So a lot of this is because archaeologists are finding these things and piecing them together. A lot of problems, like the atlatl, made of wood. A lot of tools were made of wood also, and they didn't last over time. There are a few exemptions to that. And this is a picture, it's maybe a little hard to see. This is a picture from Canada, northern Canada, where they had a edge of an ice flow melted and revealed a complete atlatl arrow there with a point on the end. And it was about 6 feet in length, and that's just been found in the last few years. So we do know that this is what they had and this is what they used. So as we move out and move a little newer, a little closer to our time period, we go to what we call the Archaic period. And this is where the land was a little drier, the climate was changing, and this is where people were all shifting to smaller animals, deer, rabbit, turkeys, but they were also hunters that would look for anything that was edible that they could find along the way. Now, this time period, 6500 BCE to 800 CE, which is what we call AD, this time period is a long time ago. The middle of this time period, just to give you reference on what we're talking about, the middle of this time period is when the Great Pyramid in Giza was built. So we had people here a long time ago. So the people were the descendants of the Paleo-Indians. They continued to adapt. Megafauna were now gone, so they were hunting these smaller animals. They were still using spears in the atlatl device. but they also started to eat more plants. And we know this from fossil evidence, from finding bones and looking at folks' teeth and what they were eating. And we saw that they were starting to eat more and more plants. What we also saw is that the variety of plants they're eating. And we see something that even affects us today, and even for like kids today, we got some kids in the audience. Kids today is like mom and dad always say, don't eat all those sweet, sticky foods, it's gonna mess up your teeth. Well, they had an unintended consequence during the archaic period where they started doing that. Now, they didn't have a candy store, but people were eating more and more. It's believed they ate more and more cactus, and so they were eating prickly pear and the tuna, which was sticky and sweet, eating more of that. And so evidence shows, there we got one back. Evidence shows that that because of that, they were developing problems with their teeth. So we do believe that a lot of folks at this time period were walking around with tooth pain. Not everyone, but a lot of them. And it's shown in the evidence they left behind. Now, at this time period, they were eating more plants, but they were still eating a lot of animals, but it was a more diverse diet. And because of that, and you could find things in the ground, it wasn't as difficult. So we know people had a little bit more time on their hands than they did before. So what did they do at this time? They started developing art. And so what they did was, we see them start to develop what we call pictographs and petroglyphs. So what we're going to unveil here is a petroglyph, and that's a carving or etching in stone. And then you have pictographs, which are drawings on caves and walls. So we see people doing that. We also see at this time period that their social structures were probably changing to become more structured and to give people more authority in different groups, so you had more leadership that you had before. Although you still had people living in caves and still living in the same structures they did before, we do see changes in the community. Now, I got some examples here. And these are items because they also developed a weaving technique at this time because they had a little more time on their hands. And we see people weaving things with plant materials. So example, here at the top, it's a little hard to see, but people made sandals for themselves out of natural materials. So they wove these together and they fitted them to their feet, and so they had sandals. I mean,